When two guards tried to move a black Marine from his son's graduation, no one expected 6 Navy SEALs to rise from the crowd and stop the entire room without saying a word. Solomon Dryden didn't think anyone would notice him when he parked his Dodge Charger behind Elmridge High. The red brick building looked like every other small-town Texas school, flags waving, kids hanging around the gym doors. Parents gathered, shirts pressed, signs held, laughter and nervous chatter carrying in the warm air. Solomon stepped out in his dress blues, boots polished sharp, posture straight. Not to draw eyes, but because that was the only way he knew how, to walk. In his pocket he kept a worn photo of his late wife holding their son Tyrone as a baby. "I promised you," he whispered, "I wouldn't miss it." He had driven 8 hours to be here, to watch his boy walk across the stage. The view. Gym was alive with noise, popcorn, and floor wax in the air, metal chairs scraping across the floor. He showed his ticket, was waved to the third row up front, family seating. A few glanced at him. One woman whispered to her husband. Others looked away. He sat quietly, eyes locked on the stage where rows of students waited. Tyrone, somewhere among them, tall, thin, with his mother's eyes. The anthem played, the crowd rose, and Solomon stood firm, his whole presence already a salute. He thought of his wife again, how she would have cried through the whole thing. Then 2 guards appeared. Not police, private security, Harlan Services stamped on their badges, black polos and cargo pants, radios clipped on their belts. They moved straight to him. One short and broad, the other taller and restless, chewing gum. The short one leaned, in low, "Excuse me, sir, we're gonna need you to come with us." Solomon turned his head slowly. "Is there a problem?" The tall one spoke up. "This section's for families of graduating seniors." Solomon showed his ticket again, calm and steady. "This is my seat. Family seating confirmed." The OA guard didn't bother to look. "We got told it's full." Solomon's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed level. "It was full when I sat down too. Who gave you that order?" They shifted, not expecting his composure. The tall one tried. Again. "Look, no big deal. Extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be." Solomon's words came lower, firmer. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son graduate. I'll be sitting right here." Heads turned now. A phone lifted slightly. The guards stiffened, muttered into their radios. A woman next to him whispered, "Don't you let them move you." Solomon nodded once. He didn't want a scene. He wanted to see his son, but the guards weren't done. "You got a problem, take it up with the school office," one said. Solomon asked his name. "Officer Malley," he answered. "Not officer," Solomon replied evenly. "You're private security." The shorter one, Garvin, stepped forward, jaw set. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He stopped, because the far gym doors opened. 6 men entered separately, not together, not loudly, but with the same presence. Broad shoulders, steady eyes, calm postures. They filtered into the crowd, sitting, standing, leaning, each one scanning the room the same way. Solomon didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew exactly who they were. The guards didn't, not yet. They hovered near him, trying to hold authority, but the shift in the room was sharp. A student's name echoed from the stage, but no one was listening. More eyes tracked the standoff. One man stood in the bleachers, arms crossed, gaze locked. Another mirrored him across the gym. A third shifted into place near the aisle. Silent, but everything about them spoke louder than words. Solomon had led them once through mud, through fire, through places darker than anyone in that gym could imagine. Garvin's voice grew tense. "You're making this into a situation." Solomon turned to him slowly. "And you're not listening." Before Garvin could grab his radio, a voice cut the noise like a blade. Calm, low, commanding. "Is there a reason this man is being bothered?" The gym fell quieter. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard stepped forward from the center aisle. Creed Marston. Years ago, Solomon had dragged him across 200 yards of open ground in Kandahar under fire. Creed's voice didn't rise, but it carried. I asked you a question, Mally stammered. Sir, we've got this under control. No, Creed snapped. You don't. More men stood up. Now 4, then 5, then 6. They didn't move toward Solomon. They didn't have to. The entire gym could feel the balance of power shifting. Creed's words fell like iron. You don't put your hands on that man. You don't tell him to move, you don't ask again. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was respect. The kind of respect men like Solomon had earned in places that most of the room would never know. The guards looked around and saw what everyone else had already understood. They weren't the ones in control anymore. As more people realized what was happening, Solomon finally looked up at Creed and gave the smallest nod. Not a thank you and not a request, just recognition. And Creed's eyes softened for a moment before he stepped back and took his seat again, arms folded, though the tension hadn't left the air. The gym waited to see what the guards would do next. The stage, the banners, the faces of board members blurred in Solomon's mind as his memory yanked him backward 15 years to Afghanistan, Kandahar province, late afternoon, the sun slamming down like a hammer and the air turning to steel. He had just finished briefing his unit when the roadside IED ripped under the convoy, flipping the lead Humvee and showering dirt and steel. Then gunfire came, not random, but coordinated. Solomon ducked behind wreckage, saw 6 men down behind, the burning second vehicle, one crawling forward dragging another by the vest. It was Creed Marston, only months into deployment, bleeding from his thigh. Solomon bolted across open ground without hesitation, no radio call, just instinct, sliding into cover beside him. Creed coughed, blood in his mouth, and Solomon grabbed Soto by the straps, hauling him backward while Creed pushed through pain. Solomon shouted over the gunfire, asking where Divas was, and Creed pointed to the hood of the vehicle where the young SEAL was pinned under engine block. Solomon sprinted again, sliding to him, gripping twisted steel, straining until his ribs burned, lifting just enough for Divas to yank his leg free before they crawled back. Creed limped forward, carrying Soto, Lim, and Horton appeared with rifles. Up, and when the dust finally settled, all 6 men were alive. From that day, there was never a question. If Solomon asked for anything, anywhere, anytime, they would be there. Back in the gym, Creed stayed seated, but his fists were clenched. The man who had dragged him through fire was now being harassed for trying to watch his son graduate. More SEALs filtered in, Javier Meek slipping into a row near the back, Zachary Wells finding space in the bleachers, each silent, each watchful. Solomon caught Meek's eye for just a second, enough to say everything. The guards didn't understand, not yet. Names were still being called, families clapping too loud, trying to mask the tension. But the eyes of the crowd kept drifting back, to the 3rd row where Solomon sat like stone and the 2 guards hovered. A school official gestured nervously at them, but Garvin shook his head, unwilling to step down. His partner Mally shifted his weight, chewing harder on gum, uncomfortable but stuck. Garvin raised his voice, telling Solomon this was his last warning. Solomon didn't move. To do what exactly? He asked. Garvin leaned in so close his belt brushed Solomon's knee, saying he was making a scene. Solomon looked straight back and told him, "You're the only one causing trouble." Garvin's face twisted and the words slipped out sharp. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, not your base." The hush that followed was heavy. Parents frozen. Cameras paused mid-record. Even Mally recoiled at how far it had gone. Solomon's voice came steady, warning him to walk away, but Garvin's hand hovered at his belt in a gesture meant to intimidate. That was when Creed stood again, stepping into the aisle, his voice cutting through the gym. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Garvin snapped back, demanding to know who he was, and Creed stepped closer, answering simply, "The man who's telling you this ends right now." The principal moved down the aisle, whispering hurriedly into her radio. School staff finally, realizing this wasn't going to fade quietly. Across the room, more SEALs rose in sync, no words, no signals, just instinct. All 6 were standing now, their stillness filling the gym like pressure before a storm. Creed gave the guards their final choice: walk away or watch it escalate. Mally broke first, muttering to back off, But Garvin stood rigid, ego refusing to bend until Solomon spoke again, telling Creed not to waste his breath the man had already chosen. Creed lowered his voice, warning not to mistake silence for weakness. That broke the last thread. Garvin stepped back, hand dropping from his belt, face burning with humiliation. The principal whispered firmly enough to send both guards walking toward the back exit, heads low, not daring to look at anyone. Solomon exhaled slow and steady. Creed eased back into his seat, and the SEALs stayed standing, silent, but present. From the student rows, Tyrone watched everything, his hands clenched at his sides, his chest pounding. At first he thought it was just routine, maybe someone helping with seats. But then he saw the way his father sat, unmoved and unshaken. The same look he had once seen when he was 12 and came home crying from something cruel said at school. It was the look of steel, not anger. Then he saw the tall man rise in a dark coat, then another, all of them strangers, yet not strangers at all, men who clearly knew his father in ways Tyrone never had. He thought of the unopened box in the garage labeled Kandahar, of the scars, of the buddies who sent Christmas cards every year. Now here they were, standing watch over Solomon Dryden in a Texas high school gym like no time had passed. Pride and fire battled inside him, and though he blinked hard, he couldn't keep the sting from his eyes. The line of graduates shuffled forward, names echoing, applause returning in uneven waves. But the gym wasn't the same anymore. The ceremony no longer belonged to balloons or banners, but to the weight of respect. Parents clapped louder as if to steady the air. The SEALs remained standing. Solomon remained seated, calm and centered, eyes fixed on the stage like nothing had happened, though everyone knew something had. Tyrone shifted forward in line, his name drawing closer, and he knew when it was finally called the gym would not be able to pretend anymore. Quiet, steady, unshakable. And when those warriors rose without being asked, Tyrone finally understood the weight his father carried. The medals in the wooden box, the folded flag on the shelf. They had always felt like relics. But today they moved. Today they stood. The assistant principal called out the next name, then another. Tyrone was 3 people from the stage. He wiped his palms on his gown, heart racing. The girl in front grinned nervously. You ready? He smiled. More than you know. Across the gym, Solomon leaned forward, eyes locked on the stage. He hadn't clapped, for every student. His focus was on the boy in the black robe with the honor cords, the boy who smiled like his mother. 1 name. 2 names. Then a pause. Tyrone Drake. The name echoed. For half a beat, the room froze, then erupted. But it wasn't the volume that mattered. It was the rhythm, deliberate, deep. The 6 SEALs still standing applauded in perfect unison, each clap heavy as steel, a salute without the salute, saying, "We see you, we see your father, we honor both." Tyrone walked steady, chin high. His heart pounded not with nerves, but with pride. Pride in his father and in the name he carried. He shook the principal's hand, turned toward the crowd, and found the only eyes that mattered. Solomon didn't wave, didn't rise, he just gave the smallest, strongest smile of the day. Tyrone nodded once and stepped off stage. Parents who'd been quiet all afternoon now clapped harder. Some stood. A few wiped their eyes without knowing why. Only that something true had just happened. Solomon sat back, letting it wash over him. He never cried in public, but inside something released, the kind of release that comes when a circle finally feels whole, even if it isn't. The ceremony rolled on, names called, but every student now walked in the echo of that moment. When the last cap hit the air 20 minutes later, chaos filled the gym. Cameras flashed, balloons bobbed, kids shouted. Solomon didn't move right away. He stayed seated, soaking in the noise, following Tyrone with his eyes until the boy disappeared into the hallway. Just before he vanished, Tyrone turned back once, and Solomon's look gave the answer. "Yes, I saw you." Creed found Solomon as the gym emptied. "You good?" he asked. Solomon nodded. "Been through worse." Creed smirked. "Yeah, but it shouldn't have happened." "No," Solomon said, "it shouldn't." Meeks joined them. We tried to stay low-key, but when that guard touched his belt, Solomon raised a hand. You did what needed to be done. That was enough. A pause, then Solomon said, I want to see my boy. Outside, the Texas sun burned against concrete, long shadows stretching from the bleachers. Students laughed in clusters, snapping photos, shouting at families. Tyrone stood near the flagpole, gown unzipped, diploma in one hand, phone in the other. When he saw his father, the noise around him blurred. They met halfway. You okay? Tyrone asked. I'm fine, Solomon said. You? Yeah. But they tried to move you. I know. Tyrone's jaw tightened. I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear. Solomon's hand went to his shoulder. And that's why you didn't. Because you knew I could handle it. And you handled your moment like a man. You didn't let anyone take it from you, Tyrone asked. Who were those guys who stood up? Solomon glanced at the SEALs by the exit, standing watch. Men I bled with, he said. Men who don't forget. Tyrone nodded. That was powerful. Necessary, Solomon corrected. Silence can be louder than shouting. Sometimes standing up without a word says more than 1,000 speeches. Tyrone grinned. So are you going to tell me those war stories now? Solomon chuckled. Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts. They stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer just father and son, but two men bound by something lived, not explained. Creed raised a hand across the lot, a gesture of respect. Tyrone returned it without hesitation. By the time they reached the Charger, most families had gone. Tyrone traced a scratch on the passenger door. She would have been the loudest today, he whispered. She would have made you retake every photo, Solomon said, smiling. Inside the car, the noise of the world softened. Tyrone turned to him. Why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there. Solomon tapped the wheel. Because I don't have to stand up for who I am, and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. Tyrone stared out the window. Solomon went on. Life gives you 100 chances to blow up, but how you respond defines you. They disrespected you, Tyrone pressed. In front of everyone. Yes. And everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. 6 men stood when it mattered, not because I asked, but because they understood. That's what people remember. He pulled out a folded photo. Tyrone as a baby in his mother's arms. I carried this through Kandahar. Through losing her. Through today. Not because it makes me strong, but because it reminds me what's worth protecting, Tyrone whispered. You always knew who had your back. I didn't need to know, Solomon said. I had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get uncomfortable. They show up. They stand. Tyrone's voice caught. I want to be like that. Like you, Solomon smiled. You already are. You walked that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal it. You stayed grounded while the world tried to shake you. Outside, the SEALs climbed into their cars. Creed gave one last look before pulling off. Solomon nodded back, no words needed. Tyrone leaned into his seat. So what now? Now we drive home, Solomon said. And you pick dinner. Tyrone grinned. Waffle House? Solomon laughed. Of course. The Charger rolled onto the road, the school fading behind them. That day would be remembered by everyone in the gym, but for Tyrone it meant something greater than a diploma. It was the day he learned manhood isn't noise. It's how you carry yourself. When the world stops watching. Some shout to be seen, others sit in silence and are never forgotten.